office.
Sir, I need you to provide your identification.
I'm not going to give you my ID. I haven't committed any crime.
You're inside a vehicle I stopped. I need to know who you are.
As a passenger, I'm not required to identify myself. I'm not being detained or arrested.
Don't make this more difficult than it has to be. Hand me your ID now.
Respectfully, I decline. You don't have legal grounds to demand it.
The red indicator on Officer Elaine Whitmore's body camera pulsed softly against her uniform, a signal she had come to associate with authority and control. To her, that blinking light meant documentation proof that she was doing her job by the book. But on this icy night in Cleveland, that same light would serve a very different purpose. It was not protection, it was a witness. From the moment her attention locked onto the black man sitting quietly in the passenger seat, every command she issued, every threat she implied, and every constitutional line she crossed was being recorded in pristine digital clarity. Whitmore had no idea that she was about to unlawfully detain a man who didn't just understand the law, he dedicated his career to teaching it. What unfolded was not chaos or shouting, but something far more unsettling for an officer accustomed to unquestioned obedience. Calm resistance grounded in absolute legal certainty. A passenger asserting his rights with precision, patience, and composure, while an officer refused to acknowledge the limits of her authority. All of it captured from her own point of view. You've seen the confrontation. Now the full story begins. Earlier that evening, a faculty dinner had stretched longer than planned, as academic gatherings often do. Professor Daniel Cross, along with his colleague Dr. Evelyn Moore, had spent the night at a modest Mediterranean bistro just off the Case Western Reserve University campus. The dinner marked the completion of a collaborative research grant, and the conversation flowed easily between scholarship, campus politics, and the shared exhaustion of teaching. By the time they stepped out into the night air, it was just past 10:45 p.m. on a Tuesday in early January. Snow lined the sidewalks, and the temperature hovered near 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Daniel pulled his coat tighter, grateful when Evelyn offered him a ride home rather than leaving him to wait for a rideshare in the cold. At 41 years old, Daniel Cross was a tenured professor of constitutional law at the university's law school, where he had taught for nearly a decade. His academic focus was the Fourth Amendment, particularly the legal boundaries of police conduct during traffic stops. Search and seizure, reasonable suspicion, passenger rights, these were not abstract concepts to him. He had litigated civil rights cases before entering academia and had published extensively on unlawful detentions. His students often joked that he could recite Supreme Court rulings from memory, and they weren't wrong. But that night, Daniel wasn't thinking about case law. He was thinking about how bitter the wind felt, how heavy the meal still sat in his stomach, and how thankful he was not to be standing outside waiting for a car. Dr. Evelyn Moore, 46, had taught American history at the university for over a decade. Originally from rural Pennsylvania, she and Daniel had become friends through committee work and long faculty meetings. Their relationship was relaxed and familiar, built on mutual respect and shared academic frustrations. They laughed as they reached her car, a well-used Toyota Camry, dependable but clearly aging. As they pulled onto Euclid Avenue, Evelyn mentioned an upcoming symposium she planned to attend. It was only then she noticed it, the dashboard alert she had been ignoring for weeks. One of her rear lights was out. She meant to fix it. She always did, but grading, lectures, and endless emails had pushed it aside. At 11:02 p.m., a marked patrol vehicle pulled in behind them. Red and blue lights exploded across the interior of the car, flooding the windshield with color. Evelyn's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she eased to the curb, her pulse quickening despite knowing she'd done nothing intentional. Officer Elaine Whitmore had spotted the faulty light while cruising the lightly trafficked street. 36 years old with 8 years on the force, she prided herself on command presence and strict compliance. To her, hesitation signaled defiance. Questions signaled disrespect. And though she would never admit it, not even internally, her perception of risk was shaped by ingrained bias. In her mind, young black men were never neutral, always potential problems, always deserving closer scrutiny. As she stepped out of her cruiser, the camera on her chest recorded everything, and the night quietly crossed a line it could never uncross. Officer Elaine Whitmore approached the driver's side window with measured steps, her flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she stopped beside the car. Evelyn lowered the window immediately, cold air rushing inside. "Good evening, officer," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "License and registration," Whitmore replied flatly. Evelyn reached for her purse, fingers slightly unsteady, producing her driver's license before leaning across to open the glove compartment. "Was I speeding?" she asked. "I didn't think I was. Your right rear light is out," Whitmore interrupted, already examining the documents. She scanned the license, then swept her flashlight across the interior. The beam passed over the dashboard, the center console, and then stopped. It landed on Daniel. He sat upright in the passenger seat, hands resting plainly on his thighs, eyes forward, calm, still, unremarkable. Yet something in Whitmore's posture changed the moment she saw him. The routine nature of the stop evaporated. Her attention shifted sharply, decisively, away from the driver. The white woman who owned the vehicle, who had committed the equipment violation, faded into the background. The black man who had done nothing became the focus. This was the pivot point, the instant where assumption overtook procedure, where suspicion was no longer grounded in conduct, but in appearance. Whitmore stepped back from the driver's window and walked around the front of the car toward the passenger side. Her body camera adjusted with her movement, its lens now centered directly on Daniel's face. Red and blue lights strobed across his features in slow, rhythmic pulses. Daniel turned his head to meet her gaze. His expression remained neutral. Whitmore tapped the glass with the metal end of her flashlight. "Roll the window down," Daniel complied, pressing the button. The glass lowered smoothly, letting the winter air spill in. "Yes, officer," he said evenly. "Go ahead and hand me your ID." It wasn't phrased as a request. There was no explanation, no qualifying language, just an expectation of obedience. Daniel recognized the illegality instantly. As a passenger in a vehicle stopped for a minor equipment violation, he was under no obligation to identify himself absent reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. He had explained this exact scenario to first-year law students countless times. Supreme Court precedent was clear. State law was clear. Departmental policy should have been clear too. He took a breath. "I'm not going to provide identification," he said calmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." Whitmore's hand remained extended in the air, palm open, waiting for a card that wasn't coming. Her jaw tightened. "You're in a vehicle I stopped," she said. "I need to know who you are." Daniel shook his head slightly. "You don't have legal grounds to demand that from a passenger." The response was measured, respectful, instructional almost. No raised voice, no sarcasm, no challenge beyond the words themselves. In the driver's seat, Evelyn glanced between them, confusion spreading across her face. "Daniel," she said softly, unsure whether she should intervene. Whitmore ignored her completely. "Sir," Whitmore said, irritation creeping into her tone, "don't complicate this." "I'm not," Daniel replied. "I'm asserting my rights." The body camera captured it all, his steady posture, his visible hands, the absence of threat. It also captured Whitmore's growing frustration, her breathing quickening as her authority was quietly, legally rejected. "Last chance," she said. "ID, now." Daniel met her eyes. "Respectfully, no." For a brief moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the idle of Whitmore's cruiser. The camera microphone picked up a faint exhale from the officer, sharp, restrained, angry. "This didn't need to happen," she muttered, barely audible, then her hand moved toward her belt. "Step out of the vehicle." Daniel paused. He had warned students about this moment when officers unwilling to concede error escalate. When lawful resistance is reframed as obstruction. "Why?" he asked calmly. "On what grounds?" "You're interfering with an investigation," Whitmore snapped, "refusing a lawful order." "It's not lawful," Daniel said, Whitmore's voice hardened. "Out now or I'll remove you." Slowly, deliberately, Daniel opened the door. "I'm complying under protest," he said clearly, projecting his words toward the camera. "For the record, I am not under arrest, and there is no legal basis for this detention." The night held its breath as he stepped onto the pavement, and Whitmore made the decision that would define everything that followed. The instant Daniel's shoes touched the pavement, Officer Whitmore seized his arm. Her grip was firm and abrupt, spinning him toward the car before he could fully straighten. The suddenness of the movement was captured cleanly by the body camera as its view tilted downward, recording hands, motion, and breath. "Hands behind your back," Whitmore ordered. Daniel complied without resistance, moving slowly, deliberately, narrating his actions with care. "I am not resisting," he said evenly. "I am complying." Metal cuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp click. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the cold night. Red and blue light washed over the scene in endless rotation, illuminating Evelyn's face inside the car, pale, frozen, disbelieving. "Officer, please," she said, her voice breaking as she leaned toward the open window. "What is happening? He didn't do anything. I'm the driver. It's my car. It's my tail light." "Stay in the vehicle," Whitmore snapped without looking at her. "Do not interfere." She began reciting the Miranda warning, her words clipped, rushed, fueled more by adrenaline than procedure. The camera captured Daniel's breathing steady, controlled, a stark contrast to Whitmore's rigid movements. Daniel said nothing. He had already made his record. For a moment, it appeared the situation had stabilized: one officer, one detainee, one terrified driver. But then another set of headlights cut through the darkness. A second patrol unit pulled in behind Whitmore's cruiser. From it emerged Sergeant Anthony Rivera, a 52-year-old patrol supervisor with more than 25 years on the force. Rivera was known for de-escalation and oversight, a veteran officer tasked with monitoring stops during late-night shifts. As he approached, he expected paperwork, maybe a citation, nothing more. What he saw stopped him cold. A handcuffed man standing calmly beside a vehicle, a visibly shaken woman in the driver's seat, and Whitmore, tense, defensive, posture locked as if bracing for confrontation. "Whitmore," Rivera said cautiously. "What's going on?" she responded quickly, words spilling out in rehearsed urgency. "Passenger refused to provide identification during a traffic stop. Obstruction, I'm detaining him." Rivera's eyes moved to Daniel. "Sir, what happened?" Before Whitmore could interject, Daniel spoke. "Sergeant, I was a passenger in a vehicle stopped for a broken tail light. I was ordered to provide identification without reasonable suspicion. I declined. I was then ordered out of the car and handcuffed." Rivera frowned. "Were you suspected of a crime?" "No." "Were you reaching for anything?" "No." "Acting disorderly?" "No," Whitmore cut in. "He refused a lawful order." Rivera turned slowly toward her. "What lawful order?" "Identification," she said. There was a brief pause, not long but long enough. Rivera exhaled. "That's not lawful for a passenger," he said quietly. Daniel lifted his head slightly. "Sergeant, my name is Daniel Cross. I'm a professor of constitutional law at Case Western. My specialization is Fourth Amendment jurisprudence." The effect was immediate. Rivera's expression changed in a way the body camera captured with unforgiving clarity. His brows rose. His jaw slackened slightly, recognition mixed with alarm. "Oh," he said softly. "No," he turned fully toward Whitmore, now voice firm. "You cuffed him for refusing ID?" Whitmore hesitated. "Sergeant, I uncuff him," Rivera said. "Now, but now." Her hands shook as she unlocked the restraints. The cuffs fell away. Daniel rubbed his wrists slowly, red marks already visible. Rivera faced him squarely. "Professor Cross, on behalf of this department, I apologize. You were detained without legal cause." Daniel nodded. "I intend to file a formal complaint." Rivera met his gaze. "I would expect you to." He returned Evelyn's documents and issued a verbal warning for the light. "You're free to go." As the car pulled away, Rivera turned back to Whitmore. His voice dropped, low and controlled. "You arrested a constitutional law professor for asserting passenger rights," he said, "and you did it on camera." The red light continued blinking, recording everything. By the following morning, the incident had already begun to take on a life of its own. Daniel Cross filed his formal complaint at 8:12 a.m., less than 12 hours after the traffic stop. His submission was not emotional nor vague. It was precise, structured, and meticulously referenced. He outlined the timeline minute by minute, quoted the officer's exact commands, and cited controlling federal and state case law governing passenger identification during traffic stops. He submitted the complaint to multiple bodies simultaneously. The police department's internal review unit received it first, followed closely by the State Civil Liberties Commission and the Midwest Justice Defense Fund, a nonprofit advocacy organization. Daniel also notified the university's Office of Legal Affairs, anticipating media interest and institutional implications. Dr. Evelyn Moore submitted her own statement that same afternoon. Her account corroborated every detail: the initial stop, the officer's fixation on Daniel, the escalation, the handcuffs, the arrival of the sergeant. She described her fear not only for her colleague, but for how quickly the encounter had turned hostile without justification. But the most damaging evidence did not come from witnesses. It came from Officer Whitmore herself. The body camera footage was automatically uploaded at the end of her shift. Investigators reviewing it were confronted with an unbroken record. The initial lawful stop, the illegal demand for identification, the refusal, the escalation, the detention, and the eventual intervention by a supervisor. There were no missing minutes, no technical malfunctions, no ambiguity. The camera captured tone, posture, timing, and bias. Within 48 hours, Whitmore was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Her badge and service weapon were surrendered. She was ordered not to discuss the incident with colleagues. The internal review moved quickly, faster than usual. Supervisors replayed the footage repeatedly, some in disbelief. Whitmore had nearly a decade of experience. This was not a rookie mistake. This was a fundamental misunderstanding or disregard of constitutional limits. The investigative report was blunt. Officer Elaine Whitmore had violated departmental policy governing traffic stops. She had misapplied authority to a passenger without reasonable suspicion. Her escalation lacked legal basis. Her conduct demonstrated poor judgment, failure to de-escalate, and indications of implicit racial bias in the selective targeting of the passenger rather than the driver. The conclusion left little room for interpretation. Termination was recommended. 2 weeks later, Whitmore was officially dismissed from the department. The decision was internal but not quiet. The case was circulated in training briefings. Redacted footage was incorporated into instructional materials for patrol officers, emphasizing the legal boundaries of stops and the consequences of ignoring them. But professional discipline was only the beginning. Daniel Cross filed a civil rights lawsuit under federal statute, alleging unlawful detention, false arrest, and deprivation of constitutional rights under color of law. The body camera footage made the city's position indefensible. Negotiations moved swiftly. The case was settled before trial. The terms were confidential, but the settlement amount was widely believed to be substantial. Daniel declined to comment publicly on the figure. Instead, he announced something else. He used the settlement funds to establish the Civil Liberties Traffic Stop Clinic at the university's law school, a program offering free legal representation to individuals subjected to unlawful searches and detentions. The clinic began operating within 6 months. Students assisted in real cases. Motions were filed, charges were dismissed, evidence was suppressed. Each success reinforced the lesson Daniel now taught not just from textbooks but from experience. The story spread beyond Cleveland. Legal journals analyzed it. Advocacy groups cited it. Law professors across the country adopted it as a teaching case. In classrooms, students watched the footage and debated the moment authority gave way to ego. Daniel Cross never forgot that night. The cold, the cuffs, the certainty with which the officer believed she was right. The camera never blinked, and it never lied. The impact of the case extended far beyond the settlement paperwork and internal memos. Within the law school, Daniel Cross became something more than a respected professor. He became a living case study. Students filled lecture halls early on the days he taught Fourth Amendment law. Not because the syllabus had changed, but because the abstract principles now carried weight. When Daniel spoke about unlawful detention, he spoke from memory. When he discussed escalation, he described sensations, the tightening of cuffs, the sound of metal, the moment authority turns physical. The Civil Liberties Traffic Stop Clinic quickly became one of the most sought-after programs at the school. Applications tripled within the first semester. Students didn't just observe, they participated. They interviewed clients, drafted motions, stood beside licensed attorneys in court. Most of the clinic's clients shared a common profile. They were stopped for minor infractions. They were questioned beyond the scope of the stop. They were searched without consent. Many were arrested without cause. Most were people of color. Many lacked the confidence or legal knowledge to challenge what happened to them. Case after case revealed the same pattern Daniel had experienced: authority asserted without foundation. Resistance interpreted as threat, escalation justified after the fact. The difference now was documentation, advocacy, and consequence. The clinic secured suppressed evidence in drug cases. It obtained dismissals in traffic-related arrests. It forced settlements in civil claims. Each victory reinforced the same lesson: the law works when someone knows how to invoke it. Daniel often thought about Officer Whitmore during these moments, about how convinced she had been, how certain. How little doubt she carried as she crossed constitutional lines. He never spoke her name publicly. She, meanwhile, struggled to find work in law enforcement. Termination for civil rights violations followed her record. Departments declined to comment. Background checks spoke for themselves. The footage never disappeared. Training academies across the state requested permission to use it. Redacted versions circulated among supervisors. It became shorthand, the passenger ID case. A reminder of how quickly authority could collapse when unsupported by law. For Daniel, interviews became frequent. Journalists asked what it felt like to be handcuffed for asserting rights. He always gave the same answer. It felt exactly like the law failing, he said, until it didn't. He emphasized one point above all others. The officer hadn't escalated because he was loud, or aggressive, or disrespectful. He escalated because he was calm and because he was black. That truth unsettled audiences more than any legal analysis. In classrooms, Daniel ended each lecture the same way. He reminded students that constitutional protections were not self-executing. They required knowledge, courage, and often documentation. The badge is powerful, he told them. But it isn't law. The law is stronger if you know it. The night itself faded into memory, but its consequences multiplied. Every client helped by the clinic was a ripple from that single stop. Every officer trained with the footage carried the lesson forward. The red light on the camera had never intervened. It had simply recorded, and in doing so, it changed everything. As the case continued to circulate through legal circles, its reach expanded beyond classrooms and court filings. Civil rights organizations referenced it in policy briefings. Community groups discussed it at town halls. The footage, though carefully redacted, became a point of reference in debates about policing, accountability, and racial bias. What made the incident resonate was not spectacle. There were no raised voices, no dramatic chase, no resistance beyond a single word. No. The entire confrontation rested on that refusal, calm, informed, lawful, and the officer's inability to accept it. Analysts noted the precision of the recording. The body camera did not editorialize. It did not exaggerate. It simply documented the sequence: a legal stop, an illegal demand, an unjustified escalation. The absence of ambiguity left little room for defense. For many observers, that clarity was unsettling. If this could happen to a law professor fully aware of his rights in a well-lit university district, what happened to people without credentials, witnesses, or confidence? Daniel Cross addressed that question directly during public talks. He described how knowledge had steadied his voice even as handcuffs closed around his wrists, how certainty had prevented panic, how documentation had transformed a moment of powerlessness into accountability. He never claimed bravery. "I wasn't fearless," he said. "I was informed." The distinction mattered. Departments quietly revised training materials. Passenger rights were emphasized. Supervisors were instructed to intervene earlier. Officers were reminded that compliance is not the same as legality. Not everyone welcomed the lesson. Some voices dismissed the case as an outlier. Others argued the officer had been undermined. Daniel rarely responded. The footage spoke louder than debate. For him, the incident marked a transition. His teaching shifted from theory to lived consequence. He described not just what the Fourth Amendment promised, but what it demanded: awareness, restraint, humility from those who enforce it. The Civil Liberties Traffic Stop Clinic continued to grow. Its reputation attracted funding, partnerships, and cases from across the region. Students graduated having argued motions that mattered. Each success traced back to that winter night. Daniel occasionally replayed the footage himself, not out of obsession but reflection. He noted the moment Whitmore stepped away from the driver, the tap on the glass, the assumption made without words. The camera never blinked. It had no bias. It did not choose sides. It recorded truth with indifference. And that truth was simple: authority without knowledge is fragile. The red light had captured more than misconduct. It had preserved a lesson that outlived careers and settlements. One part remained: the final reckoning. With time, the incident became more than a case study. It became a reference point, a quiet benchmark for understanding how power, bias, and law collide in everyday moments. Officer Elaine Whitmore never returned to patrol duty. Her dismissal followed her wherever she applied, a permanent notation attached to her name. Departments declined to elaborate. The reason was always the same: civil rights violation. Documented on camera, she had believed the body camera existed to protect her, to validate her authority, to shield her from accusation. Instead, it became the most reliable witness in the case. For Daniel Cross, the night never fully faded, not because of fear but because of clarity. He remembered the certainty in Whitmore's voice as she issued commands she had no right to give. He remembered how easily authority slid into assumption, how quickly legality was replaced by confidence, and he remembered the red light, blinking, recording, unmoved. In his final lecture each semester, Daniel told his students that constitutional rights are not automatic. They are conditional not on the law but on the citizen's willingness to invoke them. The Constitution doesn't intervene, he said. It waits. He reminded them that rights ignored are indistinguishable from rights denied. That the law does not protect passivity, it protects assertion. The clinic continued its work, quietly, methodically, case by case. People who once believed they had no voice discovered they did. People who had accepted unlawful treatment learned that acceptance was never required. The lesson echoed far beyond the university. On that cold winter night, Officer Whitmore held every visible symbol of authority: a badge, a weapon, the backing of the state. Daniel Cross held none of those. What he held was knowledge. That knowledge steadied his refusal. It shaped his words. It transformed a moment of vulnerability into accountability. The body camera captured the outcome without commentary: an officer acting on bias, a citizen acting on law, a system forced briefly to correct itself. The red light kept blinking until the encounter ended. And when it did, it left behind a truth impossible to dispute. Power demands obedience. The law demands understanding. And only one of them prevailed that night. If you believe knowing your rights can change the outcome of any police encounter, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more real stories like this one. Every week we break down cases where a single moment, a single word, or a single decision makes all the difference. Now tell us in the comments, if you were sitting in that passenger seat, would you have known you had the right to refuse identification? And do you think most people would stay calm enough to assert it?